going on, everyone? Welcome back to Dipped in Tone. I'm Rhett.
I'm Zach.
We're back. Duo episode. What's going on, man? What's new?
So many things are new. So many things. I know when this is going to come out, but I'm gonna kind of keep some things under wrap. But there's going to be a lot of pedals I'm working on.
Okay.
There's a whole lot of pedals I'm working on. One will have, I think, come out by the time this is out, so we'll talk about that. I'm gonna save that one for the end. Maybe that'll be my shill. But then there's other things that are happening too, okay. and like I'm gonna save that too. But needless to say, there's a lot of big things happening in the Mythos camp and in the Broyles camp. So I don't know, buckle up, everybody, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool, honestly, to see what you got going on. Like, you do have some pretty big stuff coming down the old pike there. I mean, When is this coming out exactly? This is August, right?
Yeah, this will be a couple weeks in August.
Okay, yeah, so you're not ready to announce the thing yet.
Not yet.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll just keep teasing it. It is a thing, though. It's a big thing.
It's a big thing. Yeah, I had this paperwork involved, It's one of those things.
A lot of paperwork. Yeah, from the outside looking in, I can confirm that there is a lot of paperwork that you've been going through and signing. And it happened so fast. I feel like it went from the idea phase to in motion in like 48 hours. Like, you told me about it on Marco Polo. I think I want to do this thing. And then it was like happening. That's
usually how I operate in general. And I know a lot of people are very meticulous planners and they take a long time to, decide things. And I operate solely off my gut. And if my gut says go for it, then I dive into the deep end. I've always been like that. So yeah. But how about you? How are you doing?
Man, we're good. I'm busy. YouTube stuff. Got a show this week with Good Trouble. We're headlining this like small festival thing up in Dalton, Georgia, the carpet and flooring capital of North America, in case you're interested.
Oh, man.
The claim to fame of Dalton. Every time I drive through Dalton on my way to Nashville, it does smell like that weird chemical carpet smell. The whole town smells like that. But
oh, man, that's awful.
Yeah. So, that's actually, it's going to be cool because it'll be our last show, not ever, but like that band over the last few years we've been going through some changes. Originally it was just Noah Guthrie and we were the backing band for Noah for like 11 years. And then we transitioned it to be more of a band setting. And over the last 2 years of doing that, kind of finding a new sound while also trying to juggle Noah's original stuff, we've just decided that we're going to like have a clean break and separate it basically from Noah's stuff and the band stuff. And I believe the plan is to do a full-length record, which we're going to start working on after this show this week. So this will be like the last show for Noah Guthrie and Good Trouble, where we're playing, a lot of the older songs and some songs we've been playing for 10 years. Like, this will be kind of the end of that era, which is a bit bittersweet. I think I'm going to make a video about it and just talk about it because it's 12 years of my life I've been playing with these guys, and they're my best friends and sort of the closest thing to brothers I've ever had. And, so it's a good thing. It's just, it's a time of transition overall,
Sure.
So yeah. And it's going to be hot as shit outside because it's Georgia in July. So,
oh yeah. Even when it's not hot, it's still humid. And it's just like, just so the other day, it had cooled off like so much. And I thought, oh, that's not so bad. And like being a glasses wearer, I like walked outside and just they immediately fogged up. I'm like, it's not even hot. It's just
dude.
So wet.
Yes. Yeah. Man.
But before we get into the show proper, we want to thank the sponsor of this episode, StewMac. Go to stewmac.com/dippedintone. You can get a discount on your order. I believe that's 10% off. So you can save for all those things you gotta gear up for this in these coming weeks when you need to spruce up that guitar, or maybe you got a gig and you got to do some stuff. Make it happen.
Yep. Put yourself a nice little travel kit together. If you're taking your guitar on the road just for a short run of shows, go to StewMac and assemble some basic tools and all the stuff you need to take care of your guitars while you're out playing shows. So yeah, thanks StewMac for sponsoring today's episode. 10% off your order, stewmac.com/dippedintone. Link is in the description. So yeah. Okay. I want to talk to you about something. I've been seeing this quite a bit online. I've been pretty active over on Threads. I don't know
I've
if you're
noticed that.
over there at all. Yeah, it's people who aren't on Threads see it, I guess, because it cross posts to Instagram, which is sort of weird.
That's the only way I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, Twitter has become such a just cesspool of idiocy that I switched to Threads months ago, and honestly, I like it a lot. It's a much nicer vibe over there, and there's a lot more musicians over there, which I really dig. So, but I've noticed this thing, and this is anecdotal. I don't have any numbers or evidence to back this up, but I see a lot of people, a lot of guitar players on Threads talking about how they've either switched to a modeler from a tube amp, or they've just never even owned or played a tube amp and could never see themselves ever going to a tube amp in any way, shape, or form in the future. Some of these posts are a little bit like snobby, There's kind of this like electric car superiority complex thing that happens where you see a lot of like, sorry, I'm going to call out some Tesla drivers here, but there's, the Tesla fanboys out there can be a little pushy. And I get an air of that in some of these posts of people just kind of like dumping on analog tube amps because they're, inconvenient, loud, expensive. It's like, once you find a good modeler, I would never go back. And I'm wondering if this is a generational thing, because it seems like a lot of younger players are leaning into this. And we've talked about this before, but there's, this generation of guitar players that are coming up now, many of them have been playing for years and are great players and have never even plugged into a tube amp because they've always just played modelers and plugins. And so, man, I don't know. Have you noticed that at all?
Well, I for the past couple months, I've slowly kind of like taken a step back from being so plugged into those parts of the conversation. I'm super active over on like that pedal shows stuff over on Facebook. That's probably the most like positive and uplifting group of guitar nerds that I don't know, that I communicate often. I get the whole like buying into an ecosystem and all that you're relating to, like a Tesla owner, being an electric car owner myself. It's like there's something that goes along with it on that side of things. It's like it's a whole mentality shift.
Yeah.
It's not just about the car. It's like, I've invested in this, all the chargers and thinking about driving differently. It's a totally different thing. But I think a lot of it has got to be just that generational thing. Because when we were growing up, and like you said, we talked about this so much, but like the ability to get a good tone quickly when we started, and maybe more so for me than you, was pretty hard. Like multi-effects, because when I started playing guitar, it was like 99. Like multi-effects existed, but there was just like the Boss, but whatever, the G, like the big effect things that they used to make. And then there was some stuff like DoD and Digitech. They had a bunch of things, and they were all together pretty bad, like people had Zoom 505s, like, and that sort of stuff. And like, man, it was so revelatory when I finally heard a really good tube amp and all those things that really clicked with me and totally shifted my perception of how to get those sounds. But now, people don't have to do that, because you can get a thing and plug into your phone and get like a pretty good guitar sound in your ears, like within minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Like that barrier to entry is way lower. And I agree with you. I mean, my first experience with, my first amp was one of those Vox Valvetronics modeling amps that had I guess it had one 12AX7 in the preamp section, maybe. It had like the little clear thing that you could see the tube in there with some LEDs behind it to make it look like it was glowing and all that stuff. But so I came up on a modeler, and when I went to music school, they had, kidney bean pods in the lab for us to shed on and play. And those things sounded terrible. I never could get a good sound out of it. And then my first like pedal was a Boss ME70, the multi-effect pedal that I had all through music school, and sounded bad, but I didn't really know any better because I didn't know about sounds and tone and all that kind of stuff. And look, I bring all this up because I'm currently kind of putting I got a Tonex, the big one here from, I got it through Sweetwater. I'm making a video on it, putting it through its paces, because I think I've seen a lot of people that are big modeler users. It seems that a lot of people are switching to the Tonex right now from Helix or Kemper or Iridium, and so I was curious about it. So had Sweetwater send this one out, and I'm actually making a video tomorrow with my friend Michael Westbrook over on my main channel, which it'll be out by the time this airs. But Michael's an interesting sort of case study in this. I've known him for years. I've played with him for years. He is a phenomenal guitar player, and he is one of the guys that I think has some of the best ears for guitar sound and tone that I know. He's a longtime amp user, mic and up amps, and he tours with an artist named Crowder, this Christian artist named Crowder. And now his whole touring rig is 2 of these Tonexes on his board, and he's not using amps anymore. And I think that's happening a lot more, especially with pro touring guys. A lot of these bigger productions, they want silent stages, which I hate. I think that's the worst thing. We can talk about that. But like, they are really good tools for a lot of working players. I've used them before. They're great for fly dates. They're great for just quick grab and go things. Or if you're on a tour, you're doing radio dates, for example, and you have to go DI. That's great. But to me, no matter how good a modeler gets, it's never going to surpass a real tube amp. Like, these are the benchmark that every modeler in existence is measuring themselves against and trying to be. And I get the convenience factor of it, but this thing that seems to be happening online, this mentality shift that I'm noticing, is there's a lot of people seeming to push that modelers and digital amps are better than the tube amps because of that convenience factor. And I just don't buy it. I don't agree with it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't either. I do think that, like, I think where most people are coming to this now is they're not like us, where the only way to play with other people was to literally play with other people. Like, doing any home recording, like when I was in high school, you had to buy like a Tascam, a Porta Studio, or any of those sort of things to do any of that. Like, if you had a Pro Tools rig or something, you're probably doing pretty well,
Yeah.
And like, it wasn't really until I got into college, in like the early 2000s, that you were able to do any home recording on your computer with any sort of like decency. But now that's how all these guys are like making music. They just hop right in. They're learning on YouTube, learning on their computer, and they're playing and practicing on their computer. So like, why even worry about having some sort of amplifier? Now, is the argument like just about modeling, or do you think it is like not seeing the point of amplifiers like almost at all?
Well, I think it is more so the stuff that's piqued my interest in this topic recently, because people have had this debate. I mean, we've talked about this on the show before, the amp versus modeler thing. But the shift that I'm noticing online is that amps are outdated, and they're only for like rich boomer dentists that can afford them to play in their houses or whatever. And like, the modeler is just the better solution, which, okay, yes, I can understand tube amps are very expensive, especially the boutique, the stuff that I have back here. This is all super unaffordable stuff. Right. When I was like just a working guitar player before, I had a YouTube channel and everything, my one amp was that divided by 13. And it was like pulling that amp, or buying that amp was really, really difficult for me. I had to borrow money and like pay back my dad. It was a whole thing. So I understand, like, if I was 10 years younger and I was working and touring like I was 10 years ago, I probably would be looking at something like this, or the Helix, or, I had a Kemper back then, but I think because I am 34 instead of 24, and I've had 10 years of playing and touring and recording with real tube amps, I've had the experience that makes me believe that these will always be at least for the stuff that I do subjectively, these will always be better. Now, I say that, and I just posted on Threads before we went live, kind of talking about this topic and asking people about it. And Jordan.wave, who, if you don't know, he's a huge guitar TikToker. I think he's like over 2 million followers on TikTok. Jordan Wave, he's great. He's definitely a younger player, more modern player than you or I am. And he responded, he said, many of the modern guitarists I aspire to be like are known modeler users. The sound of some of my favorite modern guitar recordings were also probably recorded on modelers. I guess I'm trying to meet the benchmark set by my guitar heroes. And I think that is what this boils down to. Yeah. I think a lot of the younger players today are listening to a lot of the current younger guitar slingers, especially in that progressive world. And those guys are really heavily using modelers and plugins to get their sounds. Whereas the music you and I came up on, it was all just tube amps and 412s and microphones. And
yeah. And that's one of the things that maybe this is showing my age, because I'll be 40 at the end of the year. But like when I first really started hearing like modern, like heavy guitar, and I don't know if the gentleman you just mentioned is into like the super higher gain stuff. I hear those sounds. I'm like, how in God's name? Like, I've played a 5150, I've played like a diesel, but they did like, I don't know how people get that sound. And I think a lot of that boiled down to like doing it in some sort of modeler sort of thing. I mean, and not that all of them, it's a lot of studio trickery.
Yeah, there's some, I mean, I'm not a high gain player, so I'm a little bit above my pay grade here, but there's definitely some studio trickery to get a lot of those massive high gain sounds on record. Ironically, one of them is to use less gain than you think you do. Mm-hmm. So,
but it's like usually pretty gated and and it just doesn't sound like, it doesn't sound real to me. Like, I mean, it is. I mean, obviously I've seen these people do it. I've watched people play, and I know that like guys like Tosin are the talent that is in that guy is so beyond what most people even can begin to understand, that it's not even that, but just like coming from growing up listening to roaring Marshalls and stuff like that, it just doesn't really compute with me. So if that is like your baseline, their guitar heroes are just totally different, that it does make sense. But I think a lot of this, like the mentality of being like, oh, that's only for X, or, oh, that I'll never own that because I don't understand it. It just comes down to experience, because how any guitar player could, like, it doesn't really matter like what kind of music you play. The moment you plug into a 50 or 100 watt amp with a 4x12 and you just hit like an E chord, it's transformative. It is. And like, do you remember the first time that you really played an amp or a rig that redefined your perception of what a guitar sound truly was?
Yes. Well, it redefined what a specific amp was. The first time I played a real black panel deluxe reverb, like it was a 64, because we obviously have all played the reissues 1,000 times as backline amps, and they sound good. They're fine. But the first time I played a real old one, a good one, that completely opened my mind up to the fact that, older amps, especially older Fenders, kind of are better for a multitude of different reasons. And then also they're not all the same. So when you find a good one, you should really pay attention. I should have bought that one. Actually, I could have bought it for $3,000. It was a 64 black panel that was museum grade. I mean, it was as clean as they come. And I just didn't have the money at the time, and I still kick myself for that one. But point is, like, learning the history of like early 60s Fenders, and the fact that Leo Fender, they had a plus or minus 20% tolerance in all of their electronic components. What that now means is that these amps, you can play 4 deluxe reverbs from the same year with sequential serial numbers, and they'll all sound different because the component choice was, or the component values were all different. So I say all that to say, like, yes, I've had a few experiences like that over my years of being a guitar player where I've played something and thought, oh, I get it. Or I've heard something and thought, I get it. Like the first time I heard right before the pandemic, Robin Ford played in Atlanta, Georgia at City Winery, and he brought his Dumble, like the Dumble. And when I heard Robin play that Dumble in the room, I totally understood the Dumble thing. It's like, okay, this is something special. Like that player with that amp that was voiced for him, there's definitely something there. And I do think that there's a portion of the people out there that are arguing this stuff that, you know, and not to sound condescending, but it is, I think, a lack of experience thing. Like if you haven't had the opportunity to play a variety of different amps and rigs, or be in the room with an amp that's really moving air and feeling how you have to sort of control it, you have to play the guitar differently. If you haven't stood in front of a 412 cabinet with a 100-watt amp on top of it and felt what that thump and that thud feels like, if you're primarily coming from a place of modelers and hearing your guitar come through headphones or computer speakers, like I can understand how you would look at a tube amp and think like, well, my Tonex pedal does the exact same thing. Why would I ever buy that? It's like, well, have you played one? Right. Have you like stood on a decent sized stage with a loud drummer and had an amp behind you moving air? It's a special thing, man. Yeah.
For me, because like growing up, even in the little, just the tiny town I lived in, Sparta, the neighboring town, Cookeville, there was a college. And so there was like a scene there. There was a lot of like punk bands and like weird like hardcore, because this was, that was like 2003, 2004. Like, and that scene was like super like popular. I would go and see bands like play in like parking lots or like basements or stuff that they would bring like Marshall half stacks, like JCM, or no, sorry, DSLs. Remember those? The dual super.
Yeah.
Blah. What a horrendous sounding Marshall. But I remember hearing that and just being like so just like excited about like just this hearing that. And then like a few years later, I had because like my only frame of reference was Guitar Center.
Yeah.
And lucky for me, back in the day, the Guitar Center in Nashville was, they had a room with all the fancy stuff.
Yep. I remember that.
And it was small and hot, and you could go in there and play stuff. And if you were cool, they would usually let you try whatever. And I remember, I showed up one day and tucked in the corner was a vintage Blues Breaker. Like a real one with a step-up transformer and all that. And I saw one of the guys that working there walking by, and I picked up a 59 reissue Les Paul, and I went and pointed at the guitar and then pointed at the amp and gave him a thumbs up. And he was like, shrugged his shoulders and nodded his head and walked off. And I had never played like a real Marshall,
Yeah.
And I plugged in, it was already jumpered, and I just turned it up and then like rode the guitar volume. And I didn't really even know how to do that yet. I just like read about it. And that was when it clicked for me. That, and then playing an original Vox AC30. And that was probably like 2004, 2005, that sort of era. And it totally like turned my whole approach to not only how I perceive sound, but how I wanted to approach playing the guitar. Mm-hmm. And that to me is what it's all about. Like the thing about it can sound so condescending or I don't know, demeaning almost to say, oh, you just don't have experience. But for us, being that we grew up admiring such traditional guitar heroes, when you went to these guitar stores, you wanted to play everything, or at least I did.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the younger generation, just guys, even just a few years younger than us, when they go to a guitar store, they might not even care. So if you said, hey, I've got this, I've got a 1959 Fender Bassman right here. It's all fired up, ready to go. You want to check it out? They might go, I've heard one. Like, no. Do you want to play it? They just might not have any interest in it. And that's the thing that's going to be interesting to see how that mentality shifts. But I'm curious, because being a father, I'm starting to see like, how my influence is playing out.
Hmm.
And for all the dads out there, we're going to, see that. And that's always the idea. So like, oh, when their generation gets to be our age, and everything's going to be okay. I'm sure everyone has always said that. But Graham, he loves loud music. He loves guitar. And like he's right now really into Metallica. Like,
Nice.
okay. He loves Ride the Lightning and like that album and like just the heavy thrash stuff. And I think that like maybe that bug will like catch quickly because he's going to have that influence, but who can say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're definitely doing the right thing in terms of influencing your son to get into guitar and music. I mean, if there ever was the right person to do that, but I do think context is really important here. And I think what Jordan is saying in his response is right, because, I listen to a lot of the modern bands and I respect it. I enjoy it, but it's not my thing. It doesn't move the needle for me in the same way that a lot of my favorite artists do, new and old. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff that's out there now that really is just, I love. But in terms of guitar and guitar sounds, the newer, more modern guitar sounds just don't do it for me. And it's not a old man yells at clouds kind of thing. It just doesn't do it for me. That style of music doesn't do it for me. So as a byproduct of that, those modern sounds don't do it for me. And to be honest, I'm not even just talking about like, a pure guitar tone. A good guitar tone to me is a great old guitar plugged into a great old amp. I've been writing a lot of stuff recently. I'm actually working on an EP of my own stuff, which is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, and I'm wrapping it up. And I would say about half of the guitar parts on those records, lead parts, melody parts, there's no amp and no modeler. I'm using DI sounds. I've got like a fuzz going straight into my preamp and getting that fuzzy, weird, fizzy DI sound because I think it sounds cool, and that's what I'm into. That's not like, listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan and trying to get his tone or like the David Gilmour tone. It's something new and something different. But a lot of these modern, polished, super shiny, hi-fi guitar sounds that are really popular sort of in that more modeling facing world of bands, it just doesn't do it for me. And I think that's part of why, for me, a modeler is just a tool. I mean, amps are just tools as well, but these are much more inspiring for me to use. A modeler is I'm not going to say cheap representation, but it's a lesser representation of the real thing that I reach for and I use when I have to. Like there's a fly date, there's a radio date, there's something where I can't have my amp there, then this will do a good job of mimicking the thing. And that's the problem I have with this whole idea of modelers being better than tube amps, is that they're just mimicking the real thing. And if you haven't had the opportunity to really spend time with and develop your sound with the quote real thing, I don't know, man. I think you should try that before you should make a statement like, I would never own a tube amp, because you haven't really tried one, Yeah,
it's a silly argument to say that the tube or the modeler is better than the tube amp if that's all you're trying to emulate. Like, I mean, some things, sure. Like if you're wanting to have like a weird like DI thing, or something kind of totally different, but like if it's trying to be representative of something that truly exists in the real world, then yeah, of course the real thing should. I mean, it might not be better, but it'll be. I think it's something that you should try. And like for me, and again, I think this was just the age. Like, do you think that obviously because of that there's this accessibility, that people might not have that same curiosity to try the real thing?
I think so. Yeah, that's a really good point.
And to thinking about this, like you're talking about the more modern, polished, almost like perfected guitar sound. Do you think that, because I listen to a lot of that music, I really enjoy a lot of it as like, I almost said noise, but that's not really fair. As background music to like, let me work. Cause usually there's no singing and stuff. And so it's like fun to listen to modern guitar music, but it is all kind of like homogenous. But do you think that because of these modelers, that maybe the sonic exploration that you've been taking, where you're trying to get something that kind of is altogether a bit shitty by itself, is not a thing that guitarists who are up and coming are really interested in exploring.
I don't know. I mean, I really like your thought that, well, because I've got access to everything, like, well, I don't need to play real AC30 because I've got a 64 AC30 in my Kemper right here. Like I know what that's like. But you don't.
Right.
Like I bought my AC30 about 4 years ago, and it's a 64. And I just had this experience. Dylan Adams was here last week. We were filming a bunch of stuff, and he asked to play it. He's like, hey man, I've never played a real AC30. I've only played the modern ones. I don't like AC30s. Can I try that one? And I said, yes, I think this will change your mind on what you think about AC30s. And sure enough, he plugged into it and started doing his thing. And I dialed it in because like a lot of these old amps, there's quirks to them, right? Like it's not just plug in and turn it up. Like old Tweed Deluxes, for example, like the interactive volumes and Marshalls, like jumping them. There's all these like little things that you kind of have to know about to get them to work right. But I got that AC30 cranked up, and he started playing it and was like, oh, I get it now. Yeah, this is great. And it's different than my Super, or it's different than my HDRX 20 or whatever. So, but yeah, I can understand if, I've had a Kemper, I've modeled a bunch of my amps, I've bought, the Michael Britt packs and all this stuff. And, for me, it just always boils down to, I don't like my guitar sound coming out of studio monitors or headphones. I want to hear my guitar coming through a cab in the room. And if I can't do that, I'll use an aux or I'll use a pedal or whatever. But the benchmark for me, the baseline for my sound, the sound that is inspiring for me to play, and the sound that I like best is an amp moving air in the same space as the guitar, and having the guitar and the amplifier interacting together, which is another thing that really grinds my gears about silent stages. I hate silent stages. I hate that so many modern touring acts are pushing for these silent stages. I get it if it's a pop thing, but I guess a bit of a hot take. If you're a rock band, any kind of rock indie band, if you're a band out there touring, you should have amps on stage, because solely for the aesthetic, I think aesthetics really matter. For people that are coming to your shows, 99% of them are not guitar players. They're not musicians. They might not even know what that amp does, but there is an aesthetic and there's a context for that, of having amps and drums on stage. And I just think if you're a rock band with this like empty stage aesthetic, I think you're really missing out on something there. And that's part of it for me. Like when I play with Good Trouble, I'm playing an amp always, and there's a cabinet on stage always. Even if it's too loud, I'll bring the aux or something to tame it and send it to front of house. But for us, the aesthetic of our band is bass amp, 2 guitar amps, drums on stage, because it's part of the vibe. And I think to eliminate that aesthetic in favor of having a completely silent stage just so they can mix the vocals a little better, I hate that. Really, it really grinds my gears, man.
The thought of showing up to a show, like okay, we've been to the basement in Nashville.
Yeah,
it's gross. It's great.
Yeah, man, it's a killer dive basement venue. It's awesome,
right? So if you showed up to the basement, you're like, oh, hey, this band's playing, I want to go check them out, and they're like decked out and like imagine like early 1970s, like AC/DC, like, tattered jeans, jean jackets, like black shirts that are all ripped and they're gross, and they're playing like beat up guitars, and then they had no amps on stage.
They had tone X's on their pedalboard. Like, come on, man. Yes.
Get that out of it. Like, I would argue for that kind of band, if you have a pedalboard, I might be like, I don't know. I'll forgive it. Maybe an Echoplex or something.
This
but
dude's got a Strymon on his board. I mean, man.
There is something that, and maybe it's a generational thing. My niece is turning 15 this weekend, and she's into guitar. She I think like Stranger Things, like so many others, like she didn't know about Metallica and she was watching Stranger Things and saw the Master of Puppets, and it kind of like woke something up inside her, which was really, that's awesome. And so she kind of got into some different stuff, but I should pick her brain because like, what is the, like, do people care about that? Like when you think about yourself playing in front of people, do you see that? Because to me, if I was playing a rock gig, and I didn't have at least a 2x12 behind me, I would feel like the biggest poser on the planet.
I've done it several times. The most recent one that comes to mind for me was like 2019 with Good Trouble. We played CMA Fest in Nashville. And if you don't know, CMA Fest is a bit like South by Southwest in that there's, downtown Nashville, there's a bunch of stages all sort of spread out. And as an artist or a band, you're booked to play sometimes 2 or 3 shows in the same day on different stages. And so this was a situation with Good Trouble. And so I just brought my Helix. I just brought the floor with the backpack and my guitar. And it was super convenient, man. Like it was quick throw and go. I had all of my sounds there. The entire set was ready to go, plugged up, sent it to front of house. I was set up and ready to go. And it's one of my least favorite experiences I've ever had on stage because there was no cabinet on stage moving air, and we were on wedges, not ears, which meant that I had no guitar sound anywhere on stage except right in front of my wedge. I couldn't move 3 feet to the left or right without completely losing my guitar sound because I wasn't loud enough in the house. It was an outdoor festival situation, so there was no room. I could not hear myself in the room. And it forced me to spend the entire show in one spot because I couldn't hear myself. And then because it was a throw and go festival, my monitor mix sucked because that's just what happens. So I sounded bad. I hated the way that I played because I hated the way that I sounded. And I couldn't move and engage with the band and get comfortable on stage because I was stuck in one place. And that's not the fault of the Helix. It's because I've had really good experiences using the Helix Live too. But the fact that I didn't have a cabinet on stage moving air, even a digital cab or an FR cab or whatever, something on stage behind me moving air, it completely ruined that entire experience for me. And I think did hurt the mix out front too, because I know there's a big push from front of house engineers now for these silent stages so they can have like super finite control over the mix. But my thing is like, man, we're a rock band. If you're a good engineer, you know how to deal with amps on stage. You know how to deal with stage volume. And sure, maybe I need to put like a plexiglass shield in front of my cab, or maybe I angle the cab or whatever. But like, again, maybe it's a hot take. If you know what you're doing as a front of house engineer, you can handle guitar amps on stage. And so. Well,
and let it be known that I don't think either of us think that modelers sound bad.
No, they've gotten really good.
They sound great, but there's something so visceral and the connection. I think that to me is exactly what you're talking about. Well, kind of. I mean, you're talking about not being able to hear yourself, which sucks. But like not having that feedback loop that happens when you're playing a guitar. And like, if you're playing on stage, you're playing at home and you can just like turn the right way and that everything starts to feedback and like come alive, even quietly. I've played a lot of gigs with, how do I say that? I have played many gigs with amps and not been able to hear myself because the band was so loud.
Yeah. Which also sucks. Yeah.
It does suck.
You can go too far the other way too.
Yeah. You walk out of the beam of the speaker of your amp and you just hear the drummer and you're just like, I think this is right.
Yeah.
Like I've had a lot of that too, but I don't know. There's something so, maybe it's because like, in addition to all this, like the venues to go, like the small town, like crappy venue or whatever, like playing at friends' houses and stuff might not be as prevalent. I mean, I don't know because I'm such an old man now, but like that, I had so many friends that would like pool their money and rent out like small spaces to turn them into venues, quote unquote.
Yep.
That like, is that still a thing? Like if it exists in Nashville, like I don't know about it.
I think it probably is.
It probably is.
Yeah, I think it probably is. Nashville, maybe not.
But you can't like like, how could you, like, if you want, I mean, maybe it's just because like the scuzzy rock thing is like done, you know, like.
I don't think it's done. No, it's definitely not done.
Okay.
I see it on TikTok all the time, man. There's so many young people out there with like badass local punk bands or hardcore bands or whatever, like, but that scuzzy rock thing playing DIY basement shows and that I think that underground thing is very much so alive and well.
Right.
It's not front and center because rock is no longer front and center culturally, and I think never will be, which I actually don't necessarily think is a bad thing. But yeah, man, there's still plenty of people out there, plenty of young people out there making great music, first of all types and genres and everything. But second of all, there's still really great young up and coming rock bands out there that are doing their thing. And it's cool to see. So yeah, that's, to me, a modeler is a great tool for a job. Yeah. It is convenient. It can be a solution to a certain problem. But beyond that, from my perspective, in my opinion, a modeler will never replace a real analog tube-driven guitar amplifier and cabinet on stage and in the studio. Because even when recording, I almost always get better results out of actually miking up a cabinet than using even the aux or DI solution or a Tonex. And that's because I'm privileged. I have a space where I can mic up a 100-watt amp and not, I don't have neighbors that will get pissed off. My wife is unbelievably cool with it, so I can do that. But yeah. So I think there are really good solutions for people that can't do that, which I think is most players out there. But
oh yeah,
I just don't, I can't, this new argument that I'm kind of seeing out there of like, well, I could never see myself owning a tube amp. I'm like, well,
it's the same, it's the same nonsense we all thought. Like when we were kids and teenagers, like I never thought in a million years I'd own a Les Paul. Like who could afford that? And now I'm just an embarrassment of riches, but I've worked really hard. But like, I think people just have to try stuff and just be hungry and excited to try stuff. Like guitar, it's so fun. It's so cool. And like, you don't like putting on blinders to things that could exist in your periphery is just so foolish.
Yes.
So I think that like, maybe we should end this conversation. Do you have any recommendations? Like if someone said to you like, hey, like, I don't believe it, what amp would you say, go try this and then come back to me?
That's going to depend on the player and what they like.
Let's just say your average rock blues, like normal sort of guitar player, like
a mid to late 60s super reverb, a really good one, pushed, or a silver face one that has been black faced. Dylan Adams he has a 74 silver panel that's been black faced and he's done a bunch of work to it. He brought that to the house last week and I absolutely fell in love with that amp, and he sounds incredible through that amp. I mean, it's amazing. So I would say, super reverb, a good old one, a good one, a deluxe reverb, a good one, a Marshall.
It's almost hard to recommend. See, I was going to say Marshall, but it's almost hard to recommend Marshall because like a super or deluxe, there's reverb. You can kind of like,
they're friendlier. They're friendlier to play, right? A 100-watt Marshall is a handful, and they can be really, if you don't set them right, they can be really harsh and grating because of that kerrang thing that happens. And if you're not used to a Marshall, especially a 100-watt plexi, where it's really stiff and there's all that headroom, like the amp doesn't compress that much. So maybe a 50-watt Marshall.
It's still so loud.
It is so loud. But I just did a video on this. Like the 50-watt feels much better to play than the 100 because you're compressing. The amp is compressing much more and it feels spongier and it feels more comfortable and safer to play. So,
well, even that is so like without reverb, without that, like that safety net, it's so alarming.
But it's kind of cool though, man.
Oh, it is cool.
Like, scary a little bit. Like,
it's dangerous, like driving fast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think for me, like if someone had that argument, I would probably say go go find a really good deluxe. Like you don't even have to play a vintage one. Just play like any good one, and you're probably gonna be like, okay.
Yeah,
right.
but even what we were just talking about, like that feeling, we were just kind of, because we both know that feeling of like, whoa, like,
yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a Marshall, right? The first time I turned up a Dr. Z wreck, like the train wreck thing, I got that feeling. Ooh. The first time I turned up my AC30, that like, whoa, it's like exciting. It's a little dangerous. I'm moving a ton of air. It's like, I feel it. I have never, ever once had that experience with any modeler in any way, shape, or form. And I would guess I never will, because they just don't do that thing. It's like to me, the best experience I've had with a modeler is like, that sounds good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Like, yeah, it almost sounds like the real thing. That's awesome. But I've never had that, whoa thing, like it's a little scary. It feels good. Or that feeling like, when you've got an amp moving air and the amp's really driven and compressed, you can just lean into it. Like the guitar it's just spongy and great. It feels great. I've just never had that experience with any modeler.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think you're right. It's like, oh, that sounds great. Oh, that's fun. Or that's, I can play that.
Yeah.
But I definitely have never had like the hair on my arm stand up because something sounded so good. Like when I played that 100-watt super tremolo Marshall full stack from 1969, like I literally, like, it was like I was like getting electricity from the power cord or something. And just
which
like,
you might actually have been a little bit if it's
maybe
an old Marshall.
But I think I like it.
I had that experience with a buddy's friend let me borrow his 67 Marshall JTM 100, the Black Flag JTM. Mm-hmm. And I had that experience where I plugged it up and cranked it and it was like, oh my God, like the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Like, this thing is amazing. And I compared it against my Plexi, the newer one, and it absolutely just smoked the new Plexi. It was so much better in every way. I've thought about trying to have mine modded to like get close to that circuit, but it would be like swapping transformers and all kinds of shit to get it there,
Yeah. Well, before we dip a quick rig, I think we have a couple questions. Jason is going to throw.
Yeah, we've had the live chat going here, which is something we're doing now, by the way. If you're on YouTube, you can join in and watch us live and ask some questions here.
Well, if you're on Patreon.
Oh yeah. Patreon. Yeah. Let's see. James has a question. Says, Rhett, you did a video on McGee's tone the other week. I don't think I see an amp in any of his live videos. If you were to gig the EP you're talking about earlier, how would you go about recreating those DI tones live while see feelings and air on stage? Okay, so that's a really good question. McGee, if you're not familiar, is a newer, younger player that's blowing up right now. He just put out a new album that's unbelievable. And he's one of the people I was talking about when I mentioned there's new young players out there that are doing stuff in a completely different way that is amazing. Really sounds great. I did a whole video on his tone. He does use an amp live. He's got a Roland, the chorus, jazz chorus. He's got like a JC 120, I think.
Does that count?
But it's just for moving air on stage. This is what I'm talking about, right? So his whole sound is really based on this crunchy, weird DI thing where he uses the preamp of a Tascam tape recorder and a whole bunch of weird shit. Okay. But he's still got something on stage moving air. For my sounds, I'm actually in the process of thinking through that right now because without going too deep into it, we're short on time, but I'm using that beam splitter pedal a lot from Old Blood Noise. I bought that when it came out. It's basically takes your signal and splits it out into 3 different signals with delays and stuff between them. So I think I would have to put together an amp on stage and then a stereo DI situation where I would send some to the amp on stage that's mic'd and then the other 2 out to front of house. It's just a crunchy, shitty DI sound. But that's as far as I've gotten.
There's a good question from Rob. Let's see. Can I share this? No. If the cost of a vintage amp plus the cost of the refurbishment is similar to the cost of a modern boutique version of that amp, which would you buy?
I don't know. What would you buy?
I would get a new amp.
I would too.
I like the thought of having to maintain something like if it wasn't perfect right out of the gate, like I would buy a vintage amp if I knew that it had been like recapped by a pro, or grounded properly by a pro, or those sort of things. Like, yeah, maybe, but the idea of spending a lot of money on something, I kind of like warranties, and then like people I can talk to. Again, maybe that's the old man in me.
It's kind of like having a boat, right? Like,
buying a vintage amp.
Yeah, my AC30 was recapped and gone through when I bought it 4 years ago, but it's got some issues. It's got some things, or even in the case like I went to go plug up my Skylark the other day to record with it, and it just makes a crazy noise now. It just doesn't work. So I couldn't use it. I'd use something else. It has to go to the shop. With new amps, the only real issues I've ever had with new amps is tubes. My RSA 23 blew a preamp tube the other day, which is going to lead to my shill of the week here in a minute. But yeah, I would too. I would go with a new amp. Mm-hmm. New amps, especially from a lot of these boutique builders, sound incredible, and they're quieter. Like the noise floor is way lower. They're way more reliable. Like I would go with a new amp.
Yeah. Well, let's get into dipping a rig here real quick, and then we'll wrap this episode up. So let me share this. This is from our friend Austin.
Ooh.
And this is cool. This is an interesting thing. So he's been listening to the pod since episode 1.
Nice.
So thank you, Austin. This is his catch-all rig for playing primarily pop and rock covers, meant to cover as much ground as possible. So he's got a 2018 Music Man Valentine.
Cool.
Which is cool. He's got a 2020 Gibson Custom non-reverse Firebird in California Coral. It looks like UT Orange in this picture. And then he's got a 2002 Bad Cat Cub 2, which is a Mark Sampson era.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And then the whole rig, he's got the Boss MS3, and pedals, he's got the Morning Glory, the Bondi Sick As, the DRV, Chase Bliss Mood, Flower Pedals Sunflower, Deluxe Tremolo, Strymon Big Sky, Timeline, Iridium, and then he's got it's all on a Temple Audio board with a Voodoo Lab Pedal Power 3. So
interesting.
Nice little setup
it's a
here.
Solid rig here.
But you know what's funny? I don't know if you saw it, but I made a pedal board that had a switcher and all that crap on it.
Yeah, and
oh man, I don't know.
You hate it? I thought you might.
I think I don't like it.
Dude, I knew this was going to happen. My God.
Well,
you told me that you were building a board with a switcher, and I was like, why?
Well, I know.
You're not going to like it. You're not going to use it that way, but I'm glad that you did it so that you now know that you shouldn't have done it.
It's going to be a whole thing in and of itself. Well, I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to live with it. It's only like a few days old now. It's like, I don't want to give up on my baby before it's doing anything.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to this. This is a great rig. Like, what a combination of guitars and sounds. And there's a lot of stuff here.
This might be the most unique guitar combo we've seen thus far. I don't know that we've seen a Valentine before. These are cool guitars. They're a little bit under the radar. It's a guitar player from Maroon 5, right? Mm-hmm. James Valentine.
That's right.
And it's got that cool bridge humbucker. What? It's like an offset humbucker.
It's like it's like a slanted sort of thing in a humbucker case. I'm not sure what that pickup is. I feel like it's a single coil.
Those are cool, man. And Music Man guitars, I think, are quite underrated. Man, just in general.
Every time I go, every time I go to Corner Music in Nashville, they have a bunch of Strats and stuff, and we'll play some, and then we'll pick up any of the Music Man, like the Cutlass or whatever that are like the Stratty things. And the Music Man just smokes everything. It's just
they're really good, man.
So well made.
They're really good. Yeah, they're really good. Your Firebird's the wrong shape. It's the wrong way around. I will say that. Otherwise, I really like it. I'm a huge Firebird guy. And then amp, Samson era, early 2000s Bad Cat. Beautiful. I don't know that I've played the Cub 2, but I mean,
I can't tell any of those damn things apart. I only know like the DC-30 and then the Lightning, and then everything else is like I don't know.
Yeah. I think they're all kind of the same sort of different flavors of the same thing, basically. Mm-hmm. but they're cool. I like Bad Cat stuff, and the new Bad Cat stuff is great. They brought over Peter Ahrens, and he's a mad genius at circuit design, and they've been doing some really cool stuff over there.
He's gone now, but
oh, he is. Oh,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, didn't realize that. I haven't talked to John in a little while, so okay. So then the board, really clean board. I like this build. I think you've got all the bases covered here. The only thing I'm not familiar with is the tremolo pedal, the Soundflower.
The Sunflower from Flower Pedals. It
Flower
looks.
pedals, yeah.
You look at it and you go, oh, there's 2 Chase Bliss pedals right beside. It's got the same like kind of layout as a Chase Bliss thing.
Weird.
They're cool. I remember his stuff ages ago before it was like so complicated. But I've heard good things. So yeah, I mean, the only thing on here that I'm like, why do you have that there is the Iridium. I guess if you're wanting to send it to front of the house.
Yeah. That's, and there's a great guitar player from Nashville named Austin Skinner, who I met on a gig a year or 2 ago, who was doing this. I think he had like a tweed Princeton or something on stage with him, but then had an Iridium on his board and was just sending the Iridium to front of house. And it sounded great, man. His tone was amazing.
Austin bought some of the very first Mythos pedals. So
yeah, Austin's a great player, really cool guy. Big Sky Timeline. I mean, you've got all your bases covered here. You probably a little for pop and rock stuff. You probably overkill on the Big Sky, I would guess. You're probably not using all those like super ambient algorithms. I mean, maybe you are. I don't know. Man, okay. I like this rig a lot. I like the layout. It's super clean. I like the Boss switcher. I ran the bigger version of this on my touring board for a number of years. They're really good. All right, so I'm going to deduct points because the Firebird's the wrong shape. But I'm going to give points back for having a mood on the board. This is a 9.3 for me.
Dang,
that's
a
good
really
rig.
high.
Yeah,
really
this
high.
is another one of those rigs that like I could just immediately jump into and instantly know what it's pretty similar to the rig that I've built recently. So I like it.
Yeah, I feel like I would plug into this and go like, wait, how the hell does any of this stuff work? I was not going to give it that high. No offense, Austin. I do like the non-reverse Firebird, but for me, I think I would have to dial some of that stuff back. I feel like the beauty of having that switcher and those pedals is that you can use the switcher to like, I assume MIDI control all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, so the way I would run mine, because I had the Strifecta on the board with my Boss switcher, the Holy Trinity. Yes. And I would use it to switch presets and turn them on and off. So I never had to touch any of the pedals up on that top row.
Sure.
It was super nice.
Yeah. I'm going to give this a rock solid 8.
I think that's about what I was expecting from you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's cool. I would love to hear it, but I don't want to play it. That's okay.
It's well thought out. It's well built. You got a lot of bases covered. I'm into it. Good job.
Okay. So let's hit these shills.
Let's do it.
You want to go first?
Sure. Okay.
Okay.
So, as I mentioned a moment ago, my RSA 23, my divided by 13 amp blew a preamp tube the other day. It's an EF86, which those are temperamental tubes, Yeah. And I really love that amp. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to find a new old stock tube for this. Man. A year or two ago, this company called Fuzz Audio had sent me a tube, a new old stock tube, just as like, hey, we love your channel. We love what you do. Here's a tube. And, so I went on their website and I bought a vintage new old stock EF86. It showed up, and John from Fuzz Audio sent me a few extras, which is very kind of him, very generous. So I bought the EF86, but these other ones he gave me for free. One of them I already put in that Friedman Plex amp. It was I think a Bugle Boy 12AX7 I put in the V1, and it really woke that amp up a lot, which is really cool. But anyway, yeah, he sent me a Siemens long plate 12AX7, a Millard EF86 as a backup, because the EF86s are pretty temperamental, pretty fragile. They go microphonic very quickly.
Yes, they do.
And then I got a Raytheon black plate 12AX7 here too. So that's something, if you haven't ever experienced, if you are a tube amp player and you've got a good tube amp that you really like, you should experience an experiment with swapping the V1 preamp tube around. Maybe you go and spend a little money on something new old stock and throw it in the V1 section and see how it affects. With that Friedman, it opened up the top end a little bit and it added a little more chime to the top end. And I like the way it breaks up in the high end a little more than with the stock. They just had JJs in there, you know? So yeah, it's cool. It's a very valuable or very valid thing, I think, to swap out. So, and if you're looking for new old stock stuff, check out Fuzz Audio. They're cool. And they got a lot of nice stuff.
I remember in my Dirty Shirley, it had the literal cheapest Chinese tube in the V1. And I had some buddies that gave me some really nice vintage tubes. I put those in and like, it sounded okay. And then I put that cheap Chinese tube back in and I swear to God, it sounded the best. But hey, you know, they're all different.
You don't know what, yeah. And that's why if you are buying new old stock stuff, you want to buy from someone that will back up their product because, you know, these things need to be tested for tube life and everything. So that is one nice thing is they, you know, on their website, they tell you all that information. But I mean, just look at these things. Here's this is the Millard. It says made in Great Britain on the side there. It's just a cool.
That's cool.
Tubes are cool, man.
They are cool. How do they work? I'll never know.
I'll never know. I've tried to learn and I just don't get it. How did we come up with this in like the 20s?
You know, people smart.
Wild.
Human smart. So I have a self shell, and when this comes out, this will have been out. Hopefully they're all gone, which is great. This is the Mythos Extra Hot.
Hell yeah.
So this is all of our watchers here are getting the sneak peek. So this is the sequel to the Hot Chicken, which here was the Hot Chicken.
Yep.
And well, this is the new Hot Chicken. And then the day I got this enclosure, my fine friends over at Seymour Duncan released some Hot Chicken pickups, and I was like, "You've got to be kidding me!" So I only had 5 of these, so they're just like going to float around the shop.
If one was to float down to Atlanta, I wouldn't be super upset about that.
Well,
just saying.
We had to pivot and quickly, so we decided just to call it the Extra Hot. Now this is a Nobles style circuit with a bass knob.
Ooh.
And then this is the 210 or the Airlane Drive, but with volume and gain. Nice. And it just feeds into this. There's no order switchers or nothing. And the first one was like a modded Herc and then like a super hard-on style boost pedal and had an order switcher and all this stuff. And it was a pain to make. And I said, you know, I've used that circuit enough. Let's go back to the Nobles. It's Nashville. And so, yeah, we're doing these with Carters and
drink.
Yep. And
that might be a double drink because you said it and there's text.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. You're going to get messed up, but I'm super proud. I drew that flaming chicken there and I'm just happy with it.
Hell yeah.
So
it's great. I also love the subtlety of, you know, the Nobles, Nashville, Hot Chicken, everything sort of coming together. And the 210, the Airlane Drive, also Nashville, Novo. It's great.
Yeah. It's all of it. And, it's one of those things. It's like everyone asks, what's my favorite pedal we make? And it's usually the last one that just came out. So I'm really liking it. But before we go, we want to thank everybody over on Patreon for supporting the show. And thanks StewMac for sponsoring this episode. Go to stewmac.com/dippedintone, get you some gear, work on your guitars, or build that next project yourself.
Yep. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, subscribe wherever you are listening or watching us. And thanks. We'll see y'all real soon.
See ya. Bye.